Farmer in Nebraska found $10 million buried by the Aryan Brotherhood in a rusted oil drum. The sun hung low over the Nebraska plains, casting long shadows across the dried cornfields of the Henderson farm. Tom Henderson wiped the sweat from his brow as his tractor's blade hit something solid beneath the earth. The metallic clang echoed across the empty fields, stopping him mid-furrow. He'd been plowing this same stretch of land for 30 years, and nothing had ever been buried here before. Climbing down from the cab, Tom grabbed his shovel and began digging around the obstruction. The rust-colored oil drum emerged slowly from the red Nebraska soil, its surface corroded by years underground. Tom's hands trembled as he pried open the lid with a crowbar. Inside, wrapped in layers of deteriorating plastic, were stacks upon stacks of $100 bills. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just money. This was a fortune. If you're enjoying this story so far, please subscribe and leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with Tom's discovery. Tom's first instinct was to call his wife Sarah, but something stopped him. The location of the drum, the way it had been buried, this wasn't an innocent stash. He loaded the heavy drum into his pickup truck bed and drove it to the barn, his mind racing with possibilities and fears. That evening, as Sarah prepared dinner in their modest farmhouse kitchen, Tom sat at the table, staring at his calloused hands. 43 years old, barely scraping by, drowning in debt from 3 bad harvests in a row. The bank had sent another notice last week about the mortgage. "You're quiet tonight," Sarah said, placing a plate of meatloaf in front of him. Her brown eyes studied his face with the familiarity of 20 years of marriage. "Found something in the south field today," Tom said carefully. "Something that doesn't belong to us." Sarah sat down across from him, wiping her hands on her apron. "What kind of something?" Tom glanced toward the window, making sure their 16-year-old daughter Emma wasn't within earshot. She was upstairs, probably on her phone. "Money, Sarah. A lot of money, hidden in an old drum." The color drained from Sarah's face. She'd grown up in Nebraska, understood the unspoken rules of the plains. You didn't find buried money by accident. "How much?" "I haven't counted it all, but millions. Maybe 10 million. Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Tom, you need to call the police right now. And tell them what? That we found money on our land. They'll take it, investigate, and we'll never see a dime. Meanwhile, whoever buried it will come looking." Tom's voice was low but urgent. "Think about Emma's college fund. Think about the mortgage. Think about your mother's medical bills. Think about staying alive," Sarah shot back, her voice rising. "Money like that doesn't just appear. It belongs to someone dangerous." Tom knew she was right, but the weight of their debts pressed down on him like the Nebraska sky before a tornado. That night, he lay awake, listening to Sarah's restless breathing beside him. At 3 in the morning, he crept out to the barn with a flashlight and began counting. $10,240,000. Each bill was old, pre-2000 series, untraceable. The next morning, Tom drove into town to buy supplies at Morrison's Hardware. The small town of Crestview, population 847, hadn't changed much since he was a boy. Same main street, same faces behind the same counters. As he loaded fence posts into his truck bed, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street, unusual for Crestview, where everyone drove pickup trucks or sedans worn down by farm work. 2 men sat inside, watching. One had a shaved head and tattoos crawling up his neck. The other wore sunglasses despite the overcast sky. Tom's stomach tightened. He finished loading quickly and drove home, checking his rearview mirror every few seconds. The SUV didn't follow, but the encounter left him shaken. That evening, Tom's neighbor Dale Warren stopped by with a 6-pack of beer. Dale owned the adjacent property, a cattle ranch that had been in his family for 4 generations. They sat on Tom's porch as the sun set, talking about cattle prices and weather forecasts, the comfortable rhythm of rural conversation. "Saw some strangers in town today," Dale mentioned casually, taking a swig from his bottle. "2 guys in a black SUV asking questions at the diner. Looking for someone who might have done some digging recently." Tom's blood ran cold. "What kind of questions?" "About disturbed land, fresh excavations. Betty at the diner said they seemed real interested when someone mentioned you'd been plowing new sections." Dale looked at Tom directly. "Something I should know about, neighbor." Tom considered lying, but Dale had known him since childhood. "Found something I shouldn't have. Don't know what to do about it." Dale was quiet for a long moment, watching the horizon. "Aryan Brotherhood's been active around here again. Heard from my cousin who's a state trooper. They've been looking for something they buried about 15 years back, when the feds were breathing down their necks. Lost track of the location during a leadership change." "How much would they have buried?" Tom asked, though he already knew the answer. "Enough to kill for," Dale said simply. "Enough to burn down a farm and everyone in it if they thought you had it." The weight of the situation crashed down on Tom. He wasn't just a farmer who'd found money. He was a dead man walking if the wrong people connected the dots. That night, he sat Sarah and Emma down at the kitchen table and told them everything. Emma's eyes went wide, but Sarah's face was set in grim determination. "We need to leave," Sarah said. "Tonight. Take what we can and disappear." "With what money?" Tom asked. "If we use any of that cash, they'll track us. Banks report large deposits, and we can't just abandon our home, our life." Emma spoke up, her voice steady despite her fear. "What about Uncle Jerry?" Jerry Thompson, Sarah's brother, was a private investigator in Omaha. He'd spent 15 years with the FBI before going private. If anyone could help them navigate this nightmare, it was Jerry. Tom nodded slowly. "Call him. Tell him we need help, but don't say why over the phone." Jerry arrived the next morning in an unmarked sedan, his face grave, as Tom showed him the drum in the barn. Jerry whistled low, running his hand over the rusted metal. "This is AB work, no question. They had a major operation here in the late 90s, early 2000s, used rural properties for stash houses." "What do we do?" Tom asked desperately. Jerry studied the money, then looked at Tom with the hardened eyes of someone who'd seen the worst of humanity. "You've got 3 options, none of them good. 1, you call the police, turn it in, and hope the AB doesn't find out you're the one who discovered it. 2, you try to keep it and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. 3, you use me as a middleman to negotiate with the AB, return their money in exchange for your safety." "Negotiate with white supremacist criminals?" Sarah's voice was sharp with disbelief. "They're businessmen first, ideologues second," Jerry said. "They want their money back more than they want revenge on a farmer who stumbled onto it. But we'd need leverage." Tom's mind was spinning. Every option led to danger, to a life forever changed. The simple farmer's existence he'd known was already gone, buried as surely as that drum had been. He looked at Sarah, at Emma, at the home they'd built together. Whatever decision he made would determine whether they survived this or became another cautionary tale whispered in Nebraska farmhouses. The black SUV returned that afternoon, pulling into Tom's driveway with deliberate slowness. Tom watched from the window as the 2 men from town stepped out, their movements casual but purposeful. Jerry stood beside him, his hand resting on the concealed weapon at his hip. "Let me do the talking," Jerry said quietly. The man with the neck tattoos knocked on the door, 3 sharp raps that sounded like a death sentence. Tom opened it, his mouth dry, his heart hammering against his ribs. Up close, he could see the lightning bolt tattoos, the SS runes, the marks of a violent brotherhood. The man's pale blue eyes were cold and calculating. "Tom Henderson?" the man asked, though it wasn't really a question. "That's right. Name's Garrett. This is my associate, Pike. We're looking for something that might have turned up on your property, something that doesn't belong to you." Garrett's voice was calm, almost friendly, which made it more terrifying. Jerry stepped into view. "Tom's already been in touch with people who can help resolve this situation. We're prepared to discuss terms." Garrett's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "You must be the Fed brother-in-law. We know all about you, Jerry Thompson. Retired bureau, now playing detective in Omaha." He smiled, showing yellowed teeth. "Terms are simple. We want what's ours, and we want it now. No negotiations." "Then you'll never find it," Jerry said evenly. "Because it's not here, and Tom's the only one who knows where it is. You kill him, you lose everything. You threaten his family. You create a situation that brings law enforcement down on all of us. So yes, there will be negotiations." The tension on the porch was suffocating. Tom could hear Sarah and Emma hiding upstairs, could imagine their terror. Pike's hand moved toward his jacket, but Garrett raised a finger, stopping him. 24 hours, Garrett said finally. "We'll be back tomorrow at noon. You have our property ready to return, or we burn everything you love." He turned and walked back to the SUV, Pike following. They drove away slowly, leaving dust hanging in the air like a threat. Tom collapsed into a chair, his legs shaking. "What now?" Jerry was already on his phone, typing rapidly. "Now we set up a meet, with their leadership, above Garrett's head. He's just muscle. We need to deal with someone who has authority to guarantee your safety." Over the next several hours, Jerry made calls, sent encrypted messages, used contacts from his FBI days. The Aryan Brotherhood structure was complex, with different factions and territories. The money Tom had found belonged to the Nebraska chapter, but it had been buried during a federal crackdown that decimated their leadership. The current leaders had inherited the organization without inheriting knowledge of all its assets. By evening, Jerry had arranged a meeting for the following morning, not with Garrett, but with a man named Marcus Holden, the regional commander. They would meet at a neutral location, an abandoned grain elevator 20 miles outside Crestview. Tom would bring proof of the money's existence, but not the money itself. If terms could be agreed upon, the exchange would happen later, in a public place with witnesses. That night, none of them slept. Tom lay in bed, holding Sarah's hand, listening to the creaks and groans of their old farmhouse. Every sound seemed like a threat, every shadow a potential killer. Emma came into their room at 2 a.m, crying silently. They held her between them, a family facing the consequences of pure chance. Dawn broke grey and cold over the Nebraska plains. Tom, Jerry, and Dale, who'd insisted on coming as backup, drove to the grain elevator in Dale's truck. Jerry had a gun concealed under his jacket. Dale had a shotgun behind the seat. Tom had nothing but photographs of the money and a desperate hope that he could survive this. The grain elevator loomed against the morning sky, its concrete structure weathered and crumbling. A single black Mercedes was parked in the gravel lot. Marcus Holden stood beside it, a man in his 50s with iron-grey hair and the bearing of a military officer. 2 bodyguards flanked him, their weapons visible. Jerry approached first, hands visible, movements slow and deliberate. "Mr. Holden, appreciate you taking this meeting." Marcus studied them with intelligent eyes. Unlike Garrett's thuggish brutality, Marcus projected controlled power. "This is an unusual situation," he said, his voice cultured, almost academic. "My organization lost track of certain assets during a difficult period. We've been searching for 15 years. You can understand our interest in recovering what's ours." Yet you can understand that Mr. Henderson is an innocent civilian who stumbled onto something by accident, Jerry replied. He's willing to return your property in full in exchange for guaranteed safety for him and his family. Marcus nodded slowly. The amount? 10,240,000, Tom said, his voice stronger than he felt. I haven't touched a dollar. Smart man. Marcus walked closer, his bodyguards remaining by the car. Here's my concern, Mr. Henderson. Money can be replaced, but security cannot. How do I know you won't keep talking? How do I know you won't decide to go to the authorities after we part ways? Tom met his eyes directly. Because I'm a farmer, not a hero. I want my life back. I want to raise my daughter, save my farm, and forget this ever happened. You have my word. Words are cheap in my world, Marcus said, but I've done my research on you. You're exactly what you appear to be, a struggling farmer with no criminal record, no connections, no reason to seek trouble. Your brother-in-law here is a different story. He looked at Jerry. You've made a career of putting men like me away. I've retired from that life, Jerry said. This is personal, not professional. Tom's family. That's where my loyalty lies now. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, he spoke. Complete return of the funds today. In exchange, you and your family have our word that you'll never see us again. But understand this. If that word is broken, if you speak to authorities, if any of that money surfaces, the protection ends, and we have long memories. Tom nodded, relief flooding through him despite the threat. Understood. They arranged the exchange for that afternoon at a truck stop on Interstate 80, a busy public place where violence would be risky for everyone. Tom and Jerry drove back to the farm, loaded the drum into Tom's truck, and brought it to the designated location. Marcus's men were waiting, professional and efficient. They counted the money quickly, confirmed the amount, and left without another word. Just like that, it was over. The drum was gone, the immediate threat removed. Tom drove home in a daze, Jerry beside him in silence. When they pulled into the driveway, Sarah and Emma rushed out of the house, embracing them with desperate relief. That evening the family gathered in the kitchen, the same place where this nightmare had begun 3 days earlier. Emma was quiet, processing the trauma. Sarah held Tom's hand tightly, as if afraid he might disappear. Jerry sat with them, drinking coffee, his professional mask finally dropping to reveal his exhaustion. "What happens now?" Sarah asked softly. "Now we rebuild," Tom said. "We figure out the farm finances. We find a way forward. We're alive and we're together. That's what matters." But Tom knew that some things had changed forever. He'd seen a world beyond his farm's boundaries, a world of violence and calculated cruelty that existed in the shadows of normal life. He'd learned that wealth meant nothing without safety, that family was the only treasure worth protecting. Over the following weeks, life slowly returned to a semblance of normal. The bank agreed to restructure their loan after Tom sold off some equipment and took a second job at the grain cooperative. Emma returned to school, though she was quieter now, older somehow. Sarah went back to her nursing shifts at the county hospital, but she checked her mirrors constantly, even in familiar places. Dale stopped by one evening, 6 weeks after the incident. They sat on the porch again, beers in hand, watching the sun set over the same fields where the drum had been buried. Neither spoke for a while, comfortable in the silence that old friends share. "You ever think about what you would have done?" Dale finally asked. "If you'd known what was in that drum before you dug it up?" Tom considered the question carefully. "Yeah, I think about it. Honestly, I think I would have filled it back in, plowed over it, and pretended I'd never seen it. Some treasures aren't worth finding." "Wise man," Dale said, raising his bottle in a small salute. Tom smiled faintly. "Not wise enough to avoid digging it up in the first place." As autumn turned to winter, the Henderson farm persevered. The corn harvest was modest but sufficient. Emma applied to colleges, dreaming of a future beyond Nebraska's borders. Sarah's mother's condition stabilized with proper treatment they could now afford through payment plans. Jerry visited for Christmas, bringing gifts and a sense of security with his presence. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly over the frozen fields, Tom stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the land that had nearly cost him everything. He thought about the oil drum, about Marcus Holden's cold eyes, about how quickly an ordinary life could transform into a nightmare. He thought about the choices he'd made and the ones he'd been lucky enough not to make. Sarah came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" "How much I love this place," Tom said honestly, "and how close I came to losing it all, not to the bank, but to greed." "You never kept any of it," Sarah reminded him gently. "Not a single dollar." "I thought about it," Tom admitted. "Those first few hours I thought about everything we could do with that money, every problem it could solve. But you didn't, because you were right. Some money comes with a price tag that's too high." He turned to face her, cupping her face in his work-worn hands. "Everything that matters is right here. You, Emma, this farm. That's the only wealth worth having." They stood together in the darkness. Two people who'd survived something that should have destroyed them, held together by something stronger than fear or greed, the simple, stubborn determination to protect what they loved. Spring came to Nebraska with its promise of renewal. Tom plowed the south field again, the tractor moving across the same ground where he'd found the drum. The earth was soft and receptive, ready for new seeds, new growth. He'd filled in the hole, packed it down, made it indistinguishable from the surrounding soil. To anyone looking, there was no sign that anything had ever been buried there. But Tom knew. He would always know. Every time he worked that field, he'd remember the weight of that drum, the feeling of those bills in his hands, the terrible knowledge that he'd crossed paths with evil and lived to tell about it, though he never would tell. That was part of the agreement, part of the price for survival. Emma came home for summer break from her first year at the University of Nebraska. She was studying criminal justice, a choice that didn't surprise Tom. The experience had marked her, redirected her path. She wanted to understand the world that had briefly invaded their lives, wanted to fight against it in her own way. One evening, sitting on the porch with Tom, she asked the question he'd been expecting. "Dad, do you have any regrets? About returning the money, I mean. We could have used it." Tom watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Every day I'm glad to be alive. I know I made the right choice. Money would have spent eventually, but memories last forever. I'd rather remember keeping my family safe than remember being rich." Emma nodded, satisfied with the answer. She'd grown up that summer when the drum was found, had shed the last vestiges of childhood innocence. But she'd also learned that her father was a man of principle, that some things mattered more than wealth. Those were lessons worth more than any amount of cash. Years passed. The farm stabilized financially through hard work and careful management. Emma graduated, got a job with the Nebraska Attorney General's office. She got engaged to a good man, a teacher from Omaha, who treated her with kindness and respect. Life moved forward, as it always does. Tom never forgot about the drum, but the memory faded into the background of daily existence. He was 50 now, his hair graying, his back aching from decades of farm work. But he was alive, his family was safe, and his land was secure. That was victory enough. One spring morning, 7 years after finding the drum, Tom was working in his barn when a car pulled into the driveway. An unfamiliar sedan, a woman in a business suit stepping out. Tom's old fears surged, but her smile was genuine, her approach open and non-threatening. "Mr. Henderson, My name is Agent Jennifer Walsh, FBI. Do you have a moment? Tom's heart hammered, but he kept his face neutral. What can I help you with, Agent? She pulled out a photograph, showed it to him. Marcus Holden, looking older but unmistakable. We arrested this man 3 months ago on racketeering charges. He's cooperating, providing information about AB operations. Your name came up in his debriefings. Tom said nothing, waiting. He told us about a farmer who found buried money and returned it, asked for nothing in return except safety for his family. He said you were the only person who'd ever dealt fairly with him, who kept your word completely. Agent Walsh paused. I wanted to meet you, see the man who managed to walk away from the Aryan Brotherhood alive. I just wanted my life back, Tom said simply. Well, you got it, and your family's safe. Holden's cooperation dismantled the entire Nebraska chapter. They're all facing federal charges. There's no one left to threaten you. She handed him a card. If you ever need anything, call me. The Bureau owes you. After she left, Tom stood in his driveway, holding the card, feeling a weight lift that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying for 7 years. It was truly over. Not just finished, but resolved. He walked into the house, found Sarah making lunch, and pulled her into an embrace. What's gotten into you? She laughed. Just grateful, Tom said, for every ordinary day. That evening, the family gathered for dinner. Tom, Sarah, Emma, and her fiancé David. They talked about wedding plans, about Emma's work prosecuting domestic violence cases, about Sarah's promotion to head nurse. Normal conversation, normal life, the precious, ordinary existence that Tom had fought to preserve. As darkness fell over the Nebraska plains, Tom Henderson sat on his porch one last time that day, a beer in hand, looking out at his fields. Somewhere under that soil, the memory of the drum remained, a ghost of a moment when his life could have gone in 1,000 different directions. But he'd chosen the hardest path, the honest one, the safe one, the one that preserved his family and his soul. The money was gone, spent by criminals on criminal enterprises or seized by the federal government. It had never been his, never could have been his, not without destroying everything he valued. Understanding that had been the key to survival. A shooting star streaked across the Nebraska sky, brief and brilliant. Tom watched it fade, thinking about luck and choices, about buried treasures and the greater treasure of a life well lived. He'd found $10 million and given it away. In return, he'd kept everything that actually mattered. That was the best deal he'd ever made. 10 years had passed since the day Tom Henderson's tractor blade struck that rusted oil drum. He was 60 years old now, his body showing the wear of a lifetime spent working the land. But the farm was thriving. Emma and David had moved back to Nebraska with their 2 children, taking over the day-to-day operations while Tom transitioned into semi-retirement. It was a crisp October morning when Tom's grandson, 7-year-old Jake, found him in the barn. Grandpa, can you tell me a story about when you were young? Tom smiled, lifting the boy onto a hay bale beside him. He thought about all the stories he could tell, about learning to drive a tractor, about his first harvest, about meeting Sarah at a county fair dance. But one story he would never tell. What kind of story do you want to hear? Tom asked. An adventure story, with treasure. Tom's breath caught for just a moment. Then he ruffled Jake's hair and began a different tale, one about a farmer who learned that the real treasure was never gold or silver, but the family gathered around his table and the land beneath his feet. Some secrets were meant to be buried forever, deeper than any oil drum, protected not by rust and soil, but by wisdom and love. Tom had learned that lesson the hard way, and it had saved his life. As grandfather and grandson sat together in the barn, sunlight streaming through the wooden slats, Tom felt complete peace. The past was behind him, the future secure in young Jake's laughter. He'd found his treasure after all. It had been here all along, in these ordinary moments that made up an extraordinary life.